Welcome to Tourism Talk. I'm Laura Oswald, Director of Marketing at the Paducah Visitors Bureau. Through the Creative Cities Network, Paducah has connections in all creative fields. Today, we have a very special visitor from the only creative city of music in the United States, Kansas City, Missouri. Anita Dixon is a wonderful representative of their jazz heritage, and we can't wait for her to share her story. Thank you for being with us today, Anita.
Thank you for having me. I love Paducah.
Yes, we're so glad you're back. And this is a return to Paducah.
Yes.
You were here when we hosted the Creative Cities of Craft and Folk Art back in 2017. And at that time, we were so excited to have U.S. creative cities come and prospective U.S. creative cities. And Kansas City was in that category at that time. So tell us a little bit about what that initial Paducah experience was for you.
You know, we didn't know what to expect. We got the invitation to come to this event for UNESCO. We had just been named a candidate city, so we didn't know, you know, but we said, okay, we really got to go. And I won't say we were surprised because we expected something big and we got it. Okay, right down to the badges, the sign-in for the desks, the ambassador program, the transportation schedule. There was no stone left unturned. So it set a very high bar for us once we became a creative city of music and the only creative city of music in the United States. That,
huge honor. You
know, we had decided that if we could not meet that bar that Paducah met, then we weren't going to do anything until we could.
Well, we appreciate those kind words. Glad we could set that expectation for you to create a really great splash in the network, and you are creating a splash in the network. Big projects in the works that we've been discussing while you've been here in Paducah. You know, you've learned some from Paducah, but we're certainly learning from you too.
We've had, once we realized, you know, in 2017 that we had won, you know, and then the realization that we were the only city of music under UNESCO, that kind of, you know, shocked the world. I have an ongoing meeting with several large organizations across the city, across the nation. And once it was learned that we had this thing, a couple of them were a little upset. What? Wow, how come? Because we applied.
Yeah.
And we made the case. So here we have an opportunity that as a creative city, the only creative city in the United States, it's because the president pulled us out of UNESCO. Well, no one else gets to apply. So there's a tremendous responsibility to be the only creative city in UNESCO, city of music, UNESCO in the United States, when so many others, Chicago, New York, New Orleans, share this incredible jazz history.
Right.
So we had to be certain that this is something that we can impart to the rest of the country too.
Absolutely. We, you know, describing what it means to be a creative city, there very much is a sense of responsibility. You're representing American culture around the globe.
Right.
And that is huge, and it's a huge honor for our cities to be able to be partners in that, representing America, and American tradition.
Well, you know, we've got this thing that humanity must understand its importance as is interconnected. So, creative city opportunity is just that. Excuse me. Creative city opportunity is just that. I get to come to a Paducah and see the history of bourbon and, you know, what happened to the river water and the various things, the beautiful craftspeople. I would never be able to see that unless this network was affording you to do that. And I say affording meaning that it's such a mandate. You know, get out and show the world who you are.
Yes.
You know, get out and invite people in. And with all the turmoil and various things that are going on, not just here, but all over the world, when you have a great opportunity like music will be, you know, that you can mesh this history with others and show people that we as human beings have created some incredible things. And instead of looking at all the strife and war and things like that, we can actually come together and make music. Case in point, one of my favorite new bands is Gangsta Grass.
Yes.
I'm like,
you shared
what's
them with us and we're
Gangsta
loving
Grass?
it.
Well, it's a fusion of bluegrass and rap, hip hop. And at first I thought, what does that sound like? Well, it's amazing. And those fusion opportunities are happening all over the world.
Yes.
Who better in the United States to take on that responsibility than the only creative city of music in the United States, to make sure that we're not behind, that we know what's going on worldwide.
Well, I want to get more into that, but first I have to say, this being Tourism Talk, you do have history in the tourism industry.
Incredible.
And as we talk about culture being a connector, music being a connector, craft, tell us a little bit about your past working in tours and connecting people to that culture.
Absolutely. In 1991, my youngest daughter was diagnosed with severe autism. And I needed to go home because in 91 there weren't like a lot of daycare centers and various things like that. And I needed to have a business. I was educated and I'm thinking, well, maybe I can start a business. And it hit me as I went to the Convention and Visitors Association, and the Black Baptist Convention was in town, 30,000 African Americans. And I said, well, you know, who's taking them around? And one guy said, well, you know, we don't really have a lot of Black history. I'm like, this is Kansas City.
We do.
Are you kidding me? So I literally went home. I had one of those little word processors that's like this big, and I did a flyer. Me and my 13-year-old daughter, the oldest one at the time, did a flyer and printed off a bunch of them and took them down to where they were meeting. And I hired a bus. I knew all of this stuff because it was my passion anyway, where Local 627, where the old Musicians Union was, where the Underground Railroad sites were, you know, where the old stores and history that people knew. I knew where all that stuff was. So I literally put together a tour and charged $25 a person. And that first week that they were here, I made $3,000.
Wow, you had some takers.
Yeah, I never looked back.
Yes.
And from then I started developing the African American Heritage Tour. And I was one of 15 in the entire nation at that time.
Wow.
In identifying the economics of tourism, the development of that. As a result of that, I was seen at a conference by a gentleman from the National Park Service, and they were trying to pass a bill to preserve the sites of the Underground Railroad in the United States. And he brought me in to be a lobbyist, to train other lobbyists, to not to speak so much of the passion, but to speak the economics of preserving the sites of the Underground Railroad. Consequently, I started working with them and helped to build the Underground Railroad sites and things that you see now on the National Park Service sites. We were able to pass a bill, and you would never believe the Strom Thurmond inside that bill.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of history in this. So the development of cultural heritage tourism, for me, is over 35 years old now.
Wow.
You know, and to be a consultant like I am now, and to go about identifying new opportunities is now an international movement.
Yes.
When it was just local and just national. Now it's all international.
Yeah, and the world is opening up in so many ways.
Well, to say that in 1991, you know, if someone says, do you have an email versus what is your email?
Right.
You know, well, do you have an email is what they used to say
Things
in 91.
have changed rapidly.
Now it's like, what's your email?
Yes.
You know, I can't remember dial up the whole thing. So,
Yes.
but
Well, that's a good point, because the way people travel has changed so much.
Absolutely.
And so thinking about that Underground Railroad presence online with the National Park Service site, and how people can begin to discover that and be inspired to truly have that in-place experience. Like, there's something related to place that is so important with these experiences.
Well, you know, it brings out the understanding of how important humanity is connected, how important that is to know. You know, in my work with the Underground Railroad, that's when I found out how much of a part Harriet Beecher Stowe had in the abolitionist movement. Because after writing Uncle Tom's Cabin, you know, all of these women, you know, who didn't look like the black woman, was moved by this story. And the quilting situations and the Underground Railroad history and stuff of the quilts is an amazing situation, you know, fueled by women. So I got excited about the women of the Underground Railroad and researched specifically the roles of women, you know, and how they changed America through this, you know, abolition, you know, movement. So there's no way we're not connected.
Yeah.
And every time somebody says, well, you know, this has nothing to do with that. No, it all
Absolutely
is.
does. And speaking of having to do with that, you have spent a lot of time at the Hotel Metropolitan during your time in Paducah and working with Betty Dobson there, who is a great partner of ours here in Paducah, sharing that history. I know you're talking about Underground Railroads and potential projects and things that you may be able to work and make that deeper connection between Paducah and Kansas City. What are your thoughts? What should our community know about Hotel Metropolitan?
I was moved to literal tears when I saw it was still there, because during the 60s and everything was obliterated. You know, urban renewal came through, highways came through and obliterated the history and the heritage of quite a bit of African Americans across. So to see that it was still there was an amazing situation, like Local 627's building is in Kansas City. But to know that this was, I've known about the Green Book since the 90s. So when the movie came out, and everybody, Green Book, it's a new thing. No, it's a very, very old thing. But to know that it was on the route, the Chitlin Circuit, as it was called, and to see it there and to see someone with such passion holding on to it, and I mean desperately holding on to it, and now people are beginning to realize the importance of having this kind of preservation within an urban community, because there's revitalization with just this one thing. You know, there's just one thing to preserve. You can turn around an entire community.
That's where it starts.
Through tourism.
Yes.
You can turn it totally and completely around through the heritage and the music and the food and the things that surround this one place. So the Metropolitan is one of the most special places, as far as I'm concerned, on the planet.
Yeah, well, we love to hear that. And certainly you talk about the economics of cultural tourism, and there have been opportunities for Betty to share that story, and we've packaged this amazing experience now that is exposing the public and immersing them in what that history that happened there means, you know, to us today. And that has become a favorite tour. I don't know if she's bragged on herself like this, but we will, that it's become a favorite tour of the American Queen Steamboat Company and their passengers. So people literally from all over the world are getting in and having that deep connection, being moved to tears themselves about
to understand that there was a hotel, you know, that you could go in, that Ike and Tina Turner and the names in history that everyone reveres so much. This is where the music part of who I am, that thing that I knew that the traveling of these musicians did, changing America, changing the sound of America, the soundtrack of this entire country moved through the Metropolitan.
Yes.
Okay, so just like in Kansas City, the soundtrack of the entire swing era moved in this place called 1823 Highland, you know, Local 627.
Yes.
You know, there are these things that are still there, you know, with so many of them wiped out walks, you know, the Hitsville in Detroit,
Right.
you know, who has now done a $50 million renovation. You know, well, who would doubt that Motown changed the soundtrack of America,
Right.
you know, for the rest of the world. So the Metropolitan is a jewel in the crown of Paducah, because it has the international implications go way beyond it being a black hotel.
Tell us about some of the jewels in Kansas City's crown.
In music, we have to start with Local 627. Preserved building in 1978. It was on the chopping block along with everything else in the urban community. But the musicians who were still alive at that time, Kai Basie, Eddie Baker, who we credit for all of the preservation of jazz in Kansas City, saved that building.
Yes.
They saved Local 627, which was the Colored Musicians Union, before they desegregated in '72. But anyone who was anyone in American history, music, black. If you came to Kansas City, I had someone ask me, well, if you were black and you're a musician, you came through Kansas City, you stopped at Local 627 because that's where the union was. You had to update your card. You had to do all of those things. When B.B. King died, it was too funny. They gave me a call at the one of the radio stations gave me a call and said, well, was B.B. King at Local 627? I said, well, not only was he at Local 627, but there's a letter in one of the archives that was sent to B.B. King that said he still owed $2 on his membership, and they wanted it.
He needed to go back.
You know, like, you got to pay your membership. But these are the things that became Kansas City swing, something distinctive in jazz era. You know, you can define jazz literally by the eras. Okay, the beginnings and the roots in New Orleans. But by the time it made it to Kansas City, it had changed. And it was because we lived in 3 square miles.
Right.
40,000 people lived in 3 square miles. So you were next to the church, that was next to the school, that was next to your house, that was feet away from everything. So musicians' opportunities were church, school, club, all in one area. So if you were a church musician, you had that gospel thing going. If you played in the old after hours houses, you had that blues thing going. And then you had that dance music, okay, that you had to learn how to play. So Kansas City swing is defined by that danceable ability, okay? So, and it lasted the longest out of all those, well, I won't say it ever ended really for us. But the swing era is one that's defined all over the world as very, very popular, and Kansas City being that. So in our application for UNESCO, we emphasize that we are an incredible place for music because we have inherited quite a bit of music, the folk, you know, of the countries, and the various aspects of the blues from the Exodusters and Iowa and, you know, all those various Nebraska that came through during the 30s. And of course, the swing and the jazz that was created.
So obviously Kansas City has a really deep cultural heritage in music and in jazz, those connections around the country and the world. What are some of the ways that as a creative city you're looking to sustain that culture and move it forward?
In collaboratives are the key to all of this. If we're not, you know, people say you need to be on the same page. No, you just need to be in the same book. You know, you need to understand that each page tells a different part of the story.
Right.
So when you collaborate on those stories, case in point, we were talking to Giuseppe Biagini, was here, and we're going to introduce in 2021, we're going to introduce the last phase of our application, which is something called the Voyage of the Drum.
Wow.
Which will demonstrate to the rest of the world a unique jazz festival, how jazz made it as the only indigenous art form in America. What happened? Where did it begin? How did it get to Kansas City, right? There's a whole history of that that's studied all over the world. But we're doing something this year in Fabiano that introduces that, and that's called the Day of the Drum, like the Day of the Bird, but the Day of the Drum. So we're going to go through the collaboratives with crafts and folk arts, gastronomy, media and film, to demonstrate that the drum was the first cultivated instrument of humanity, and how all of this all over the world, how the drum was cultivated. Sometimes the drum was cultivated, you know, like someone brought to my attention the other day, through gastronomy. Like, are you kidding? This guy's like, no, we ate the deer. That ate the deer, and they would use the skins and cover those things. So that's one part. The other part is the beat or the sound. The Native American had a different beat and sound than the jazz artists did. You know, and so we've got these things that are indigenous about the drum all over the world. So we're going to introduce that part of it first and work with the 400 years of enslavement commemoration to talk about the importance of those drums from Congo Square to Kansas City. So those are collaboratives that we're talking about. Crafts and folk art goes without saying. How was the drum cultivated? What were the materials that were used? How are they used in Japan and, you know, the Native American communities and the various, the drum was such an intricate part of the world of all humanity. So these are the things, the collaborations are going to be key to us transforming communities. And I look forward to that because I learn something new all the time. The marimba.
Yes.
You know, found out in our trip to St. Cristobal that the marimba was actually an enslaved African construct. When they were removed, when they were stolen from Africa and brought to that part of the world, they created this music. And they said from the very ships that they were enslaved on to the barks off the trees, they created this sound from the marimba that is considered to be a specifically Latin, and come to find out it's African.
Right.
So these are the things that humanity is waking up to by being UNESCO Creative City.
And both of those connections we can relate to. We've had Giuseppe here in Paducah, and the Days of Bread has been an incredible connector around the world. And so we love being able to see drums be the next stage of that. And we obviously can see how craft fits into that. I know we'll have some musicians and craftspeople that would be so interested to be part of that.
Well, this also gives an opportunity for when I say for the economics of what I'm talking about to come through, because we have organizations that, you know, Remo makes drums. You know, there are people who support music programs and various things like that, but not on this level, not on this level of collaborative. It's usually at a local type thing.
Right.
But now corporations and communities and governmental departments get a chance to do that. There's a band for the Army, Navy, Air Force.
Right.
All of them have a band. You know, who knew that? You know, well, I knew that, but
Right.
you know, these are the things that we're talking about. Now we can, the collaboratives open up way beyond cultural enrichment.
Yes, and taking it to the world. And I think that you know, that honor of representing American culture and engaging, collaborating is so great. But another thing that I'd love for you to talk about on the local level that you're doing is with apprenticeships in music.
You know, I've been working with the American Federation of Musicians for many years now and trying to reestablish the union as an opportunity, because if you're a traveling musician internationally, you must belong to some organization like this in order to continue to work, right? Well, we were discussing things and I was saying, well, you know, we've got this depletion of musicians of playing this music in America, but it's an international what do? We need to replenish our ranks. Well, they agreed, so I went to go to get an apprenticeship number for apprentices in the Department of Labor for music, and it did not exist.
Wow.
So it took me 3 years to convince the Department of Labor that musicians are an apprenticeable profession.
Yes.
And so December 4th, 2018, we received the first apprenticeship program for musicians in American history. So the UNESCO City of Music and the American Music Apprenticeship Program will be rolling out all of this history on the International Day of Jazz, April 30th.
Yes, very special global celebration.
To let people know that now this is not, the music is not just cultural enrichment, it's now job readiness. And therefore the government and various people like that will be assisting in making sure that America constantly has opportunity in indigenous music. And that's not just jazz or blues, that's country western and folk and, you know, the various aspects of indigenous music to America that's being played all over the world, but our children are missing out because it's not a focus for us anymore, and it should be.
Yes, well, that's very important work, and we can't wait to see where that goes. I know we are interested in being part of and being inspired by that celebration. As you say, the economy, you know, of it all. The creative industry is huge, and we know that that is part of our future as cities. So before we sign off, I would love for you to leave our viewers with maybe just a thought on the value of culture and why we should care to carry forward this creative city.
It is the wave of the future. The GMs are never coming back. The Fords are never coming back. The industry that we once knew, just like the old industrial age, is not coming back. The thing that is sustaining humanity now, it's its creativity, its very essence of being human. It is now marketable, bankable, and transformable into economic, into literal dollars. And until we understand that we need each other and able to pull all this stuff off, you know, you can no longer negate, appropriate, and those things like that. You have to allow for people to be themselves, do their thing, and be absolutely certain that we are helping to perpetuate humanity and the opportunity to be human, and not so much as who you are or where, what do you say, what country I came from or what origins. I am a human first and foremost. And this is my culture, and share it with me.
Yes.
Okay, you don't have to own it because it's not for you to do that. That's why it was given to these people to do this and given to them to do this and be best at it than most folk are. So, you know, I think that's what I'd like to leave people with too.
Beautiful.
Let's just join each other.
And I hope that that will inspire our viewers to maybe visit Kansas City and see what we may have in common and what we can experience there.
Yeah, I hope so.
Where can our viewers find out a little bit more about the things you've talked about today online?
Well, online for me, if you just go to my website for a while, www.sageworldview.com. Of course, you can go to our visitors, visitkc.com. That is our Convention and Visitors Bureau. And as we progress, we haven't put up our new website yet, but it will be creativekc.com.
Great.
Yeah, Creative City.
KC.com.
That'll be coming soon.
Great.
So.
Well, we will be excited to see that, and we so appreciate you being with us today, Anita. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and thank you for joining us today. You can always head over to paducah.travel/Creative City to learn more about Paducah's role in the Creative Cities Network and the great company we keep here in the United States and within the 180 cities worldwide in the network. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
1, 2, 1, 2, go. Hello, ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. Hello, ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-ba. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Ba-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-ba. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-ba. Ba-ba-da-ba. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-ba. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da-ba-da.